guys, it's Brooke with SupertutorTV, and today what I'm going to share with you is how I got into Stanford. So before we get going, I want you to all subscribe to our channel. All you have to do is click on the button subscribe. It's awesome, it's easy, and you know you will love it. And then the other thing that I want to say is if you happen to be pre-prepping for any standardized test, go ahead and head over to SupertutorTV.com, join our mailing list, and check out our website. We have lots more blog posts and resources for people prepping for tests like the ACT and the SAT. So go check it out and let's get started. So how I got into Stanford, I know all of this is always sort of a mystery. Like, I don't actually know. I'm not an admissions counselor, but I do know what I did to apply there, and I do know what was part of my application, and I knew what I had to offer. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. The number one reason that I think I got into Stanford has to do with the fact that I really think it was the right school for me. At Stanford, when I visited, I saw this like total passion for learning, a little bit of like this California laid back atmosphere, beautiful weather, and this freedom accorded to students and this belief in students at the university. They treated you like you were a part of this community. And if you end up at Stanford, that you matter and your ideas matter just as much as this professor over here, because even though you're younger, someday you may be the contemporary of that professor, or you may go win a Nobel Prize, who knows, or you may go have a Fulbright scholarship. We don't know where you're going next. But I had this feeling that the school totally believed in its community and listened to its community and had this vibe that just loved learning, had a ton of passion for learning, and also had this sort of entrepreneurial spirit. You can do whatever you set your mind to, you know, and you're a part of this incredible community that can change the world. I think if you really want to get into a school that you love, one of the most important things is that the vision of that school and what that school is all about really resonates with you, and you see completely how it fits into your life and your story. If you can see that and you can tell that back to all the admissions people in your essays, that's kind of a clutch way to get into the school. I think Stanford says that for every one student it lets in, there are two other students that it rejects that are fully 100% capable of the workload of the school, meaning they have everything it takes to cut it at Stanford, but they're not letting those people in. And so the question is, how do you become that one person who gets in versus those two who don't? And I think this idea of really being able to tell the story of this school is right for me and this is why it's right for me is really important. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is demographics. Demographics do matter when it comes to college admissions, for better or for worse. And I had a few demographic advantages. Namely, I was from a big square state. I went to high school in Kansas, in a suburb of Kansas City called Overland Park. I was from a public medium-sized suburban high school. It was a blue ribbon school the year that I graduated, so it had a great reputation academically. It was about 1,800 students, and it was not a place where you had a lot of people applying from. I would say in any given year, there were probably between 0 and 5 applications to Stanford from my high school at most. So you can kind of see competitively that's what I'm dealing with. Coming from somewhere obscure sometimes can help your application. I know that that's true. So if you're from the New York metro area, or if you're from, you know, the Bay Area, it's probably a lot harder to get into Stanford than if you're from Wyoming. But that's part of what the campus is about. That's part of diversity. So now I'm going to talk about grades. My class rank was 5th out of 475, so it was the top 2% of my graduating class. I had a 4.42 weighted GPA, which was about a 3.93 unweighted. I got 2 B pluses in high school. I took every honors or AP class that I almost humanly possibly could take. So I guess the point is like, if you have 1 B, that isn't necessarily a deal breaker for Stanford. If you have all these other things going for you, you may still be able to get in. Test scores. I know many of you know I've scored perfectly on the ACT and perfectly on the SAT, but I scored those as an adult on more recent versions of those exams. When I was in high school, I actually scored a 1530 on the SAT. I got a perfect score in the math, and I got a 730 on the English. They were different times when I was in high school. Not as many people studied for those tests. I studied for the SAT for maybe a weekend or two, and I shrugged my shoulders and said, oh, this test score looks good enough for any of the colleges I'm applying to, so I didn't really worry about it that much after that. My SAT score on the verbal was just over the 50th percentile mark of students who they accept, and my score on the math was well above the 75th percentile of students who they accept. The environment we live in now is more competitive. You've got to do more work in order to get in. But if you've got the same potential, like you're still going to be able to make that happen. It just means that you might have to prep for the ACT or you might have to prep for the SAT in order to be the most competitive candidate that you can be. To me, the ideal is if you are doing test prep and you're trying to get into a school, the ideal place to be is at the 50th percentile or above. And I would say if you want a chance, you really want to be at that 25th percentile of above, unless you've got some other factor working for you. If you're a varsity athlete, if you're the best in the world at something, if you're from a context in which there is no test prep available or your parents don't have the money for it, things like that. If you're from a different context, they're going to look at you in context. So unless you have one of those situations going for you, it's usually good to be at that 25th percentile or above to even apply. And ideally, you probably want to be at that 50th percentile if you can, just to make it more likely. So I took a few other tests. I know I took the SAT2 math, and I was in the high 700s. I also took some AP tests. I got a 5 on the AP bio test my sophomore year. I got a 5 on the US history exam, and I got a 4 on the AP lit exam, but that exam was after senior year. And I don't even know how much schools look at AP scores. I think it may be a factor, but they're not supposed to hold it against you if you don't have them, because not all schools offer AP tests, and then that wouldn't be fair. Activities. When it comes to activities, I was like super hyper involved in high school. I was in the band and I played the flute, and that was probably one of the biggest activities that I did in high school. And then I was also in the Kansas City Youth Symphony, which was like the regional like honors orchestra. Our organization traveled to Carnegie Hall, so I like played a concert in Carnegie Hall, which was really cool. I went to state solo and ensemble as a sophomore, which was pretty rare at my high school. There was only like a handful of us in our high school band who were at the state level sophomore year, so that was kind of cool. I got to play the piccolo in the orchestra, so it was like being the #1 piccolo player in the state of Kansas. I was named Musician of the Year at my high school my senior year. And what I'll say about that is what Stanford admissions counselors probably will tell you is that you have to be really good at something. It doesn't matter what you're really good at, but you have to have something that you're awesome at. And so I think for me, that thing that I was awesome at, or the thing that I was the best at in my bubble, was the flute. In addition to that, I also did like choral choir stuff. I was in the normal chorus during the day, and then I was in like the extracurricular honor choir for a couple of years. Other activities I did, I was in theater. I was also a cheerleader. I was on the track team for a couple of years. I ran hurdles and I ran the 200. I wasn't that great at it, but I could do it. I was on the math team my freshman year. So yeah, between all that, that kept me pretty busy. I mean, I also did some fluffy things like National Honor Society and like some sort of community service. Bottom line was I was pretty darn involved, and I'm sure that probably played in somewhat to my application. So there you go. So now that we got through activities, let's talk essays. So Stanford used to have a couple of quintessential essays that were always on its application. One is Stanford has this infinite roommate essay where you like write a note to your roommate about like something that happened to you that day. I did kind of a crappy job of like answering the roommate question, but I really had this story that I wanted to tell, so I sort of forced it into the space for better or for worse. But what I talked about is I took a gap year, as I mentioned earlier, and during my gap year, I was a volunteer in a juvenile prison. And I remember there was this girl at the juvie who I was talking to, and she told me the story about how she ended up there. And her story was that she was there because she wanted to be there. Because at home, her mom didn't treat her well and abused her and didn't feed her all the time. And so she knew that if she acted up or if she like got violent toward her mom, that her mom would send her to juvie. And then she knew she would be safe. She would be away from her mom, and she would have food to eat and be taken care of. This story kind of like rocked my world because I was this nice suburban kid who thought that if you're in juvenile prison, you probably did something wrong or you're like a bad person. But the truth is, what I realized is that these people have seriously difficult circumstances that they live in, and they're dealing with way bigger problems than I ever had to deal with. And I can't even imagine what life would be like if I had to deal with problems like that. So I wrote an essay on that. Other essays, there's like a picture essay on the Stanford thing, and I had this picture from this class project where we had all these people like hold this sign that said love, and then we did this like cool multimedia slideshow for one of my theater classes. So there I talked about some of my creativity, I talked about teamwork, I talked about like the conceptual idea of art, that art has the ability to speak to people, that art has the ability to say something in our world about the world that we live in, and reflect that world. And so that was something that was like really exciting for me. And then finally, there was a book essay where you had to talk about a character from a book who inspires you or a person who inspires you. And I talked about Jane Eyre because Jane Eyre is badass. So there's some of what my essays were about. I think the bottom line with my essays were that I definitely conveyed that I love learning for learning's sake, I definitely conveyed the sense of my creativity. And I also think I was able to get across a little bit of the way my mind works and how I like to dissect things and tear things apart and think about them intellectually and spin them on their head, and just my passion for ideas. So there you go. There's all of the data that I threw at Stanford and said, hey, do you want to let me in? They said yes. If you are preparing for your own admission to college, I wish you the best of luck. I hope that you're able to dig into yourself, figure out all the awesome parts of who you are, and put that self on the page and share who you are in the truest way possible as you prepare all these essays. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Go to our website, SupertutorTV.com. Subscribe to our mailing list there. We will keep you up to date on everything awesome that we do. And I will see all of you guys next time on Super Tutor TV. Ciao.